So you found yourself a super duper hidden secret dungeon now, did you? Well, good on you. Time to go dungeon crawling. Oh, but wait. Yeah, we're not talking about dungeon exploration today, but rather something equally important. Preparation. Most of the common complaints about Breath of the Wild I can totally get behind, or at the very least understand it from their perspective. I can see why people were put off by the weapon durability system. I agree that the story could have been more fleshed out, and that the shrines got repetitive after 120 iterations. And I'm all in favor of Breath of the Wild 2 not taking place during monsoon season. There's one complaint I do have a particular gripe with though. It's not the most prominent of criticisms, but it's definitely out there. Here's a very basic reenactment of that complaint. So I was in this shrine, right? And I ran out of arrows which I needed to progress. So I had to leave the shrine and go all the way to the shop to buy some more. I wanted to skip time and wait for the rain to stop, but I didn't have any firewood or flint on me, which was so frustrating. Well, guess what? That's on you, buddy.
I'm not your buddy, friend.
Breath of the Wild is a game about survival, managing your resources and equipment. Well, you just want everything handed to you on a silver platter? I am of course over-exaggerating, but I do stand by the fact that preparing for a challenge is half the fun. It makes that challenge all the more satisfying to complete. As opposed to the older installments in the series, there's no limit to the amount of ammunition you can carry. So in that regard, there's no excuse not to make sure to have a decent stock of arrows on you at all time. The same goes for other items that might come in handy at any point. Me, I always make sure to have a torch and a Korok leaf on me. It doesn't matter how good of a weapon I may find, I will just drop a weaker one. I try to make sure I have at least a few different elemental weapons on me, just in case I run into an enemy who's weak to that element. Especially fire-based weapons come in handy in case I need to start an easy campfire, light a torch, or burn an obstacle. Sure, it sucks having to sacrifice a valuable weapon slot just in case you need that one specific thing to progress. And Nintendo might be wise to give these types of items their own separate category instead of pooling them all together with the other weapons. Nonetheless, it was a sacrifice I was willing to make during my first playthrough of the game. Call me old school, but I really feel like modern video games have spoiled us a little too much at times. Just the sheer thought that a player might be annoyed or frustrated to have to turn back and resupply has driven developers to make sure they hand us all the stuff we need right on the spot, at least in terms of the Zelda series. This approach has one unfortunate side effect, namely giving away the solution prematurely and sacrificing responsible resource management for convenience. The early entries in the 3D installments are particularly guilty of this, where the game designers purposely place a specific item or ammunition in a room just so we don't have to leave the dungeon to restock. What this essentially does is hint at the solution before we even have to think about it. Oh look, it's an endlessly respawning bush containing Deku seeds. I guess there's probably an ice switch or something I gotta hit. Ah, a Deku Baba. Guess I'm gonna need that stick to light me some fire in this room. Gee, they are sure handing out a lot of magic right before I enter this door. I'm guessing the boss will probably be weak to magic attacks. Now, I cannot completely fault the older games for doing this, since, as mentioned before, ammunition was capped at a relatively low number, so it was much easier to run out of resources, but it's definitely not something I would like to see repeated in the future. With the sequel to Breath of the Wild, we will no longer be restricted to the old system, which only let you carry so much stuff at a time. Instead of placing jars around with the necessary stuff inside, I'm in favor of giving that responsibility back to the player. If you didn't prepare a decent amount of meals or potions in advance with different status effects and refills before you venture into a dungeon, you have no one to blame but yourself. The early 2D games were a lot more ruthless in that regard. Ruthless, but not completely unfair. You still found stuff you might need later on in the dungeon, but not necessarily in the same room or right before a boss fight. In A Link to the Past, it was pretty much mandatory to carry at least 1 or 2 bottles of magic potions with you, if you wanted to stand a chance at clearing Turtle Rock or the Ice Palace. I do understand that Nintendo wants Zelda to be accessible for players of different skill levels, and Breath of the Wild 2 definitely shouldn't be notoriously hard akin to Ultima Underworld when it comes to dungeon crawling, but a good challenge shouldn't be avoided either. I've compiled a small list of things I think would make for a nice inclusion in the sequel when it comes to dungeon preparation, both in terms of items but also gameplay mechanics. Keep in mind, these are just things I would like to see, they are not predictions. When it came to lighting your way in a dark place, the torches did the trick. However, as mentioned before, the big turndown was the fact that it hogs your weapon slots. I think a lantern, similar to the one from Twilight Princess, would make a welcome return. This item would consume lantern oil just like in the aforementioned game, but it wouldn't take up space in your inventory. The lantern oil itself could function the same way as any of the other collectibles we find in the game, something we can either mine or buy. And hey, Link uses cooking oil when he's preparing food, so why not make it a collectible, right? The second disadvantage the torches had was the inability to use a weapon, climb, or do anything else really while you're holding it. But this problem was already solved in Twilight Princess. And in Breath of the Wild, we can see NPCs walking around with lanterns attached to their hips or their backpacks. This way, Link's hands would still be free to perform other actions while still having a source of light. We also find lanterns laying around stables and houses, so we don't need torches anymore. We have the technology. In the E3 trailer from last year, we can see that Link and Zelda are very well prepared for their journey into Hyrule's underground, with a packing animal outfitted to the brim with all kinds of bags and materials strapped to its body. So here's a crazy idea. Instead of planting some spare weapons on your wall, what if we could store extra items on our trusty steed? Once you register a horse in the original, it got outfitted with a saddle. This was pure aesthetics though, and it didn't have any other function. It would be an interesting addition if we could outfit it with extra saddlebags that can hold a limited amount of spare items, basically functioning as a secondary inventory. We might not always be able to venture deep into a dungeon with it, but we could at least leave him or her at the entrance or in the central room as a backup storage. When you run out of a specific item or ammunition, we can transfer stuff from our saddlebag into our inventory. In order to keep it reasonable and somewhat close to reality, this inventory should of course not be too big. Let's say for instance a maximum of 2 weapon slots, 1 or 2 bows and shields, and a couple of materials and collectibles. We don't want to make our poor ride collapse from exhaustion now, do we? The many shops and merchants around Hyrule sold us arrows, apparel, food, and other materials, but no weapons, bows, or shields, which was a bit strange if you think about it. How did all these other adventurers obtain their gear? Now, as I mentioned in my Breath of the Wild milestone video, the weapon durability system didn't really bother me that much. But if we're going to have large and complex dungeons or caves to explore in the sequel, this will become a problem. Finding an entrance to a dungeon only to realize half of your inventory is either empty or damaged is not exactly ideal, since we would have to spend quite some time randomly scouring the landscape just to look for some decent weapons. It would be best if we have the option to buy or repair them, just in case the Master Sword decides to bug out on us again. Shops could be limited to only selling low to mid-level gear, enough to keep us going, but without taking away the exploration part of discovering rare and powerful weaponry in the overworld. Or high-level weapons could simply come at a very hefty price. Alternatively, we could be able to repair certain weapons by sacrificing materials. Instead of just gemstones, we could for instance be able to mine precious metals, gold, silver, copper, etc. The stronger the weapon, the more rare and expensive the materials you would have to sacrifice for a quick fix. Guardian-based weapons would be repaired with ancient parts, wooden weapons with wooden fiber, you get the point. This way, we can still have weapon durability to a certain degree, but also options to restock on weapons more easily for means of preparing for a serious dungeon crawl. Being able to craft certain items on the spot, given you have the right materials, would be an amazing addition to the game in my opinion. This doesn't have to be as complex as in other games of course, with tons and tons of options, skill levels and combinations. This isn't an RPG, but I don't see why Link shouldn't be able to craft some basic necessities. Suppose the devs decide to skip my lantern idea and simply stick to the torches. If say I have a bundle of wood and some other material like cloth or a specific monster part, I should be able to craft something as simple as a torch, right? Or create some extra arrows from sticks and a piece of metal. Or a very basic emergency bow from a stick and some string. Again, they don't have to go too crazy with this and make it as complex and varied as the cooking system. The weapons and ammo shouldn't be as robust and high quality as the quote-unquote real stuff, but some easy craftables that don't break the game's difficulty but rather make your life a little bit easier in emergency situations would go a long way. Keep in mind that when I make a video like this, it's not my intention to set you up for disappointment. The final product could include none of the stuff that I'm talking about and still be a great game. It's meant to be fun and harmless theory crafting, and I love reading through my comments to see what you guys come up with. We will just have to wait and see what Nintendo comes up with once they finally reveal more, and hope that some of our wishes may have been heard. Before I end the video, I want to quickly give you an update about the channel. Yeah, you know this was coming eventually. I held off from even considering to create a Patreon since my channel is still relatively young, and I first wanted to prove my worth to you all and show you what I have to offer. If you're a fan of the channel and you would like to contribute financially, it's greatly appreciated. However, if you enjoy the channel and you don't have the means or simply don't want to spend your hard-earned money, that is completely fine. As fans, you are all equal in my eyes, and I'm not going to treat anyone differently or only respond to people who contribute. Now, of course, I will have reward tiers for those who choose to donate, since it's only fair. But nothing changes if you're only here to watch, it's just as valuable to me. After all, what would my content be without an audience? The reason why Patreon benefits me is because it allows me to free up my time from my corporate job to focus more on the channel. Eventually, I want to try to switch to 2 videos per week, and only relying on YouTube revenue is simply not a strategic choice, since I'm only one guy and my content isn't exactly the type you can hammer out in one day. Revenue also tends to fluctuate, so it's not something you should put all your cards on. I'm not looking to become a rich celebrity YouTuber guy or anything, that's just not for me, but as long as I can pay my bills, go on a hike now and again, and continue to make cool videos for you all, I'm a happy camper. If you decide to donate, I don't know what else to say, but thank you. And of course, thank you all for watching this video and sitting through this little ramble at the end. Next week, you'll be in for a real treat since I will be collaborating with my friend and fellow YouTuber who is none other than the one and only Masked Nintendo Bandit. I hope you look forward to see what we have in store for you. As always, if you haven't already, consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and become lost in the maze with me. Until the next video, this is Don signing off, and have a good one.